The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. Tom Rand's focus is on carbon mitigation as an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, author, and speaker. He is co-founder and managing partner of ArcTern Ventures and sits on the board of a number of clean energy companies and organizations. Tom is a regular contributor on Canada's leading opt pages and television, and you will often see him standing on the stage, waving his arms as he speaks passionately about the intersection of climate risk and economics. Now let's get into the episode with Tom.
Lysandra, we're missing our colleague from the UK, but I know he'll be very interested in this topic. I'm looking forward to our guest today.
So am I. Today we're joined by Tom Rand, co-founder of ArcTern Ventures. Welcome, Tom.
Good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Tom, I'm the lucky person who gets to start the questions, and I'll tell you why I'm so excited. I have seen you speak several times. You have been a big advocate on climate change and technology and what businesses have to do. And so I'm so pleased to have you online because you walk the talk and you not only are you an author, but you actually invest in organizations to make it happen. So you're the real deal. And so I'm really pleased to have you on. Let me start with the first question. If you could, what do you think is the current state of affairs in Canada as far as addressing climate change?
Well, from a couple of angles. The first, I would say on emissions, we're clearly a laggard. I mean, I just got back from a big event in Madrid on low carbon buildings, and there's a lot of comparisons at a high level between countries on economic performance versus energy inputs, for example. And we're way behind our European peers, way behind a lot of others in terms of economic output per unit of energy. So we're just not getting there in terms of decoupling economic activity from emissions at a macro level. I know that there's a bunch of policies in place that have yet to deliver on emissions reductions, so the jury is out, really. But I think the most important, so there's a lot of industries that are working on it in Canada. There are leaders, there are laggards, there's a mixed bag like most places. But I think here we're at a bifurcation, and we really need to focus on it. I mean, we have a dominant energy incumbent industry, which are doing what they're going to do, right? They're going to fight to their dying breath to be able to export as much, fuel as they can, bitumen and whatever else, nat gas too. We should expect that from the incumbents, and I just think it's naive to think otherwise. And so we really need to focus on how we change that conversation. The clean tech sector in our country actually employs more people than oil and gas. It has, in my mind, way more economic upside over the next 20 or 30 years. I mean, this is skate to where the puck's going to go kind of thing. But it's disaggregated, right? It's not single employers with, a lot of people in one industry that can dominate a policy discussion, that can dominate the business pages. It's a concentration of energy in the energy sector. And I think we need to be very careful about how we're thinking about economic resilience and economic strategy over the next several decades. Because I hate to say this, but if you're producing high carbon, high cost oil, you're a dead man walking. I mean, net zero is not a joke. Whether we get there by 2050 or 2060, we're getting there. We have to get there. And in a net zero world, we're just not putting gasoline in cars. We're just like, there's a marginal use for oil and gas, and that's going to be the low cost producers out of Saudi who can produce that stuff for $4 a barrel. So I think we need to be very careful about how many eggs we have in that basket and listen carefully for voices that are quieter, but are more concentrated around where our economic upside comes from in decades to come. And I think it's around, distributed solid state energy infrastructure. I mean, this is a technology, that once it's out of the bag, you can't put it back in, right? I mean, same with, we tried to, mechanized agriculture. Nobody could stop the mechanization of agriculture at the turn of the last century. Nobody could stop the digitization of communications. And the same thing's going to happen for energy. It's coming to our shores, whether we're navel gazing with Alberta or not, right? So we're just not prepared, I don't think, as a country. We are a petrostate, honestly, and our dialogue has been usurped by those who rationally in their own self-interest are looking to perpetuate that petrostate. But I think we need to think hard about what the other pathways are. I think they're showing some promise. I can talk about that in more detail, but Canada is not ahead of the game. We patted ourselves in the back for many years while Trump was president, and the U.S. has just passed us in the fast lane, and we are scrambling to catch up, offering checks to battery factories and all that kind of stuff. So I think we need to to think hard about long-term economic opportunity and what voices we should be listening to and supporting as we think about what the energy pie looks like 20 years from now and who's going to play there.
Let me do a follow-up because I'm in total agreement here with you. What do you think then, based on what you've said, where do you think the priorities should be for Canada to advance this, to move the direction that we need to move? What do you think are the set priorities in the next year?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question, right? So I don't think the government should shy away from picking winners. I mean, even in terms of strategic sectors and so on. I think we should listen to those market signals in order to pick our winners. I mean, I personally think Canada has an enormous potential in some of the unsung areas like agriculture, like forestry, like biogenic carbon capture. You know, I do think we have biogenic hydrogen renewable natural gas potential. It's kind of an unsung hero of the story. And I do think we've started to make a play in battery factories. The checks we're writing for those are enormous. And I think if we need to think harder about the vertical opportunities in the battery sector. So if you ask Northvolt, why are they in Quebec? Well, they'll tell you, well, we think there's a great opportunity to source the minerals we need in this province, and we've got a green grid and so on. Great. Is there a follow-up from our governments on that, right? Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario. I mean, environmentalists and local people need to think hard about, are we going to oppose everything? Or are we going to begin to think about Canada's real strategic advantage in the transition to a low carbon economy? I have lots of heroes in energy storage, and I mean, I got my portfolio. But as a government, it's a different question, right? And from a government's perspective, you look at the nation as a whole, and I think agriculture, biogenic sources of carbon capture and fuels, and the vertical opportunities within the battery chemistry and within electrification generally. I think we're a mining country. We haven't opened a new mine in a long time because it's difficult here. We're cleaner than the Chinese. We have better local governance over these kind of projects, but that also hamstrings us. The Americans are going through the same process right now. How do they work with Indigenous communities? How do they work with local communities? How do they build support amongst those who are affected by these mines? How do they share the economic upside? We need to do that. These are decade-long projects. Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario has been sitting there for decades. There's an enormous amount of value we can extract from there, not just as a raw material, but as a country that's capable of processing those raw materials in an environmentally responsible way to produce the inputs to batteries, which is going to be one of the biggest markets of the 21st century. So I think that's one way to look at it. Look at the nation holistically, our talent, our natural resources, and so on. And I think we can play smart against the Inflation Reduction Act, and we can pick some sectors that we think we have an advantage in.
Something we emphasize quite a bit on this podcast is the importance of education. How can Canada educate business owners and politicians on the economic benefits of leadership in addressing energy and climate issues?
Well, I think a lot of that leadership is coming from some of our business leaders in the space. A fellow by the name of Andy Chisholm, for example, who led the National Commission on Sustainable Finance, has really grappled with the question of financial reporting, carbon risk reporting, and that Canada, as a country committed to transparency across the board, could be leading issues about transparency on financial risk, carbon risk, climate risk in the financial sector, Bay Street. I don't know that we're doing that. I think, there's a lot of pushback from Wall Street now. So everybody is, there was a point 3-4 years ago where there was a lot of really big talk from the big financial players, the Glasgow Convention, about how the financial sector is going to play a role in solving this problem and being transparent about their own view of risks and so on. And that kind of petered out. And the reason it petered out, at least publicly, is because I think the financial community's figured out how hard this job is. Net zero 2050 is the hardest thing humans have ever tried to do, frankly. And so I think there's a lot of good spirit behind it. I think people have acknowledged the problem and the necessity, but they back off a little because they've understood how hard this is. And when I say hard, I mean 5 or 6% reduction in emissions every year. The only time any country's ever seen that is when the Soviet Union collapsed, right? That's not how we want to do this. So the financial sector, I think, has had an eye-opening moment where they've realized we got to be on side, we got to play here. Folks like Andy Chisholm have led that charge and asked for accountability in their language. Mark Carney and so on. These are Canadian leaders on the international business stage who've asked for this transparency. They got it in terms of words and commitments, but the sector's backed off a little now. Now we need to re-engage. And I think we re-engage by beginning to talk about, what solutions look like. I mean, let's work backwards from net zero to today, find pathways of opportunity. And there's going to be stranded assets. There's going to be people that get hurt. There's going to be all kinds of pushback. There's going to be all kinds of downside, but there's ultimately upside. And I think figuring out where those pathways of upside are, that's what BlackRock wants to do. That's what Brookfield wants to do. And they're at the table trying to find those spots. And I think when it's an all hands on deck effort, policy combines with international organizations of accountability and transparency, with national objectives, with commercial opportunities, when all those line up, I think you'll get the financial sector playing. And I think Canada's role could be as a siren song of transparency within the financial sector. Our big five banks are well regulated. They have a great reputation. They're thinking hard about how they play. I mean, when you have a mortgage on a building from a big five bank, is the percentage of emissions from that building to the extent you've mortgaged it on your balance sheet? Yes, they are. And the banks have kind of nodded and said, yeah, those are our emissions. Great. What are you going to do about it? So I think those discussions are happening. And I think Canada has led the way on some of that. I think we're quietly doing that work. BlackRock's doing it loudly. I think we're doing it quietly. I think we have some leaders. Carney and Chisholm are two of them. There are others. Barb's Van of the pension fund world is working on a green taxonomy. So I think Canada's financial system and commitment to transparency and good governance can play a real leading role here if we get it right.
So, Tom, that's really encouraging to hear. I don't know if many people recognize or understand how forward-thinking the financial institutions and the parties that you're talking about. You hear about Mark Carney, but so my question is, like, in Canada, who are the role models that we should be looking towards on this climate action? Is it the financial institutions? Is it businesses? Is it,
Yeah. But I don't want to hold our financial institutions up as paradigms and angels on this space. They're not angels. Again, I think it's potential. I think there are angels within that space. I've mentioned a few of them. It's hard work, right? When you think about, people say, well, let's just have the big banks divest. Okay, maybe. Then all that capital movement moves to the private markets, and you don't see it anymore, because a bank is really it's the capillaries and the arteries through which capital flows. And I think it's easy to say make the big banks divest. It's another to say how is it that we can best leverage those institutions involved in the space. It's just hard work. So there's no angels there. But I do think there are groups like Brookfield who are way ahead of this. I mean, in terms of raising capital to be part of the solution, there are lots of entrepreneurs. There are individuals within the financial sector, but I have yet to see a financial group really step up as a paradigmatic example of what this is going to look like in the 21st century. Again, most of these groups are already pre-committed to the biggest energy infrastructure in our country, which is mainly Alberta. And that's a really tough nut to crack. That's why I think transparency plays a role here. I mean, if we're honest about net zero, right? So give ourselves the probability of hitting it by 2050, right? Maybe it's a coin toss, right? So there's a coin toss that every oil company in Alberta is out of business, right? That's what that means. That's what it means. So those conversations are hard, and most of our existing large institutions are fully committed in that sector, and they're making money in that sector. The Ukraine war has bumped up profits, right? So it's very hard to get off the drug you're on, right? And we're on that drug in this country, and it's hard to get off that drug. Sympathy for addicts and all the rest of it. But so I don't know. I'm not going to point out any shining examples. There are people who are shining examples, but I don't see institutions yet who are shining examples. The Feds have set up some good stuff, like the Canada Growth Fund and so on. Like those are good policy initiatives. We yet to see how it's going to play out. Most of that money is going to go for carbon contract for difference, which is an interesting idea from Trevor Toome, I think was the guy who came up with that out of Calgary, University of Calgary. So there is bits and pieces where there's shining lights, but I don't know. I can't point to a house on the hill and say, those folks have it right. Let's follow them.
Just to follow up on that, is there an industry sector current that should? I mean, you've talked about the oil and gas sector because sooner or later that industry will be gone. But is there any industry, that's steel industry or cement industry or any industry that you think is kind of leading or could be that beacon showing that, this was what we did and now we've changed and it's actually working better for us? Is there anyone that your sector that you might?
To be honest, no. I mean, the cement industry tried back on when we were building the cap and trade system under the guidance of Glenn Murray in the Wynne government. And the cement sector was at the table, working hard, trying to figure out how they play. But, nothing's happened there. And cement's hard to decarbon, as you know.
Yes.
Steel, the Europeans are way ahead of us, So no, I don't really see a lot of leaders in our big industries. There is like the built environment. I mean, there are champions within every industry. The built environment, I would point out CapREIT. CapREIT is way ahead of the game in terms of saying we're going to decarbon our buildings. They've built strong relationships with engineering firms capable of delivering on that decarbonization agenda. I won't go into the details of it, but that's becoming a systemic relationship. And I think CapREIT demonstrating to the market that decarboning buildings adds value to your asset, increases tenant value. Like there are lots of ancillary benefits beyond the payback period of the energy retrofit, which by itself, by the way, has a better payback than any investment you'll ever make. I mean, energy efficiency is the single greatest investment you could make as a CEO because you get returns of 25 to 90%. Where are you going to get that anywhere else? Maybe a little less if you go into net zero. But the point is, so I think there are some of those kinds of sectors that are really leading, and the built environment's 40% of our emissions, so it's nothing to sneeze at. But the big ones, forestry and so on, I mean, those are hard to decarbon. I think they need a supply chain. There are electrification of vehicles coming down the pipe that I think they can endorse. I know Glencore worked hard to talk about a fully electrified gold mine. I don't know if it got delivered or not, but the mining sector, I think we've led there before. We've led there on governance. We've led there on environmental standards. I think we are a paradigmatic example of a good way to mine around the world. There's obviously exceptions, and there's tough friction points in developing nations on local acceptance of mining inputs and so on. But I think we are a good standard on that globally. Historically, we could be a good standard on that on the decarbonization side going forward. So I think there are some bright lights there if we leverage our strengths. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to pick up because my experience is that Canadians are well received around the world, and I think we have a ton of talent and capability to actually lead. It's just we need the leaders to actually make it happen. That's the challenge. I think. I don't know if you feel the same way because you talk all around the world. What are your thoughts?
No, we have that reputation, but that reputation is disappearing, right? I think if go to a conference somewhere else in the world and stop thinking about Canada as the maple leaf everyone puts in their backpack because we're friendly and nice. We're not that country anymore on climate. We're not.
Right.
And, all of our sectors, when we think about forestry and mining and energy, I mean, these are the big needles to move. And I don't see a lot of our folks moving it. We're pretty comfortable comparing ourselves to the United States and thinking that we're doing okay because of, and that's not the case anymore. We've been left in the slow lane by Biden. The Americans, when they arrive, man, they arrive. So I just think we need to rethink our view of ourselves and understand that we are seen as laggards on this issue. There's still time to step up, but we're not champions on this thing.
Fair enough. And the question is, will we ever be champions? Because we have this huge
100%.
opportunity, but
100%. Of course we are.
Yeah.
Of course we are.
Yeah.
We just got to get there.
Yeah.
Well, keeping it on a positive note, what promising advancements do you see on the horizon for Canada in clean technology and sustainable innovation?
Yeah, I think on clean tech, we are leaders. And I think, some of those are in our own portfolio. So I'll sing from my own songbook a little bit on this one. But there are others outside our portfolio as well. There's some great work being done on lithium extraction, clean and efficient lithium extraction. There's a group working at our Royal Roads University now led by Tad Homer Dixon that is working hard to figure out how we fast track enhanced geothermal, leveraging Canada's drilling capacity to unlock that enormous resource beneath our feet. So there are some great examples of leadership on the clean tech side. So I've moaned about our incumbents, enough of that. The up-and-comers are leaders, right? So, within our own portfolio, look, I'll sing the praises of HydroStore. This is an energy storage company that is building, gigawatt scale energy storage projects. It's advanced compressed air. It's a battery made out of air, rock, and water. These are massive projects under development in California and Australia and a bunch of other places. And this is, these are big enough to store a nuke plant all night long. These are massive energy storage systems, utility scale. They last for 50 years. They're economic. They're bankable. And Kurt Van Wallingham, the CEO, is a personal hero of mine. I've watched what he has done and how deep he dug during the valley of death that we walked through together to get where we are. We are at a breakout point now. We're backed by Horizons Fund and Goldman. We're backed by CPP. We're going out to raise $800 million this year. We're going to get it. I mean, we will be the leading energy storage company on the planet in a couple of years. There's no question about that. What's most exciting for me about that company, though, is when I looked at how does technology affect infrastructure? Like the whole world wants to say, there's a lot of venture funds now. There's 200 that do climate tech. Everyone wants apps and SaaS and ARR and so on. And I get it. It's easier lift. But we're not going to solve this problem without affecting infrastructure. And HydroStore has a link between innovation and infrastructure that is unique. And we call it at ArcTern systemic innovation. So the innovation is at the level of the system. The components are well understood. So it's Baker Hughes, GE, Siemens equipment for compressing and expanding gas. It's mining equipment that dig a hole in the ground. It's big EPC companies who can deliver them. So the punchline is there's two things that come out of that. One is that the systems are bankable, right? That you can build $1.5 billion system in California and it's a bank. Now you have to spend a lot of time and effort convincing people, but because those components are so well understood, you're not reinventing a piece of machinery. The deeply conservative nature of project finance sort of takes a closer look and says, oh, I have seen that kind of stuff before. How does this work again? And you're just putting those known components together in a new way to a new result, which is energy storage instead of oil and gas. And then the other thing is, which is more exciting, is that we need to figure out how to scale up low carbon infrastructure by orders of magnitude every decade, right? I mean, like the terawatt hours that we need to build is mind numbing. So you can't do that if you're trying to build a new supply chain. That's why, I love batteries. I'm all for it. I'm impressed by how fast lithium ion side is going to power EVs, but you got to build a mine. You got to refine the material. You got to build the factory, make the batteries, deploy the batteries. Great. That curve will go like this. If you are leveraging once we have that first operational $1 billion facility, literally we're going to have 100 people building these things simultaneously around the world because the supply chain is capable of going from 1 to 100 because the supply chain is the oil and gas supply chain. So it can, in other words, that technology can not only affect infrastructure, which we need to do, it's bankable at the infrastructure level, but it can scale at that level commensurate with the scale we need to see on climate risk. So that's why, and there's another, Woodland Biofuels is coming. This is a biogenic hydrogen, renewable natural gas provider. We're going to build a facility down in Louisiana. It was going to be Sarnia, but the Inflation Reduction Act, seduced us. And so we're down in Louisiana. Like the Americans know how to put a policy in place that help you raise money. In Canada, anyway, I can get into more detail on that if you want, but the punchline is we're going to make hydrogen and renewable natural gas out of forestry waste and ag waste. And so we have a zero carbon chemicals platform, but better, we have a pure stream CO2 coming out of that we're going to put underground, partnered probably with Denbury, we'll see. So we're deeply carbon negative hydrogen, renewable natural gas. We can make money doing that. If we're going to take carbon out of the atmosphere, which we're going to need to do over the next century, leveraging nature's ability to capture the carbon rather than building a massive industrial infrastructure to capture the carbon out of the atmosphere, I think is the way to go. Nature knows how to capture carbon. It's been doing it for 4 billion years. So the incremental cost to Woodland to put that carbon in the ground is about $1 per ton compared to 500 or 600 on the DAC side. So that, again, it's an people have walked away from cellulosic ethanol and so on because Kiora fell on its butt. The industry was just decimated by big high profile failures, but we stuck with it, kind of went into hibernation for a while and have now reemerged. And because it's not a sexy area, people have looked at cellulosic inputs kind of with a frown. Now I think people are beginning to figure out, oh, actually there's a lot of scale there. There's a lot of cost advantage there, so that's, I think, going to be another big Canadian champion is going to be Woodland as they build carbon negative hydrogen renewable natural gas plants. Again, it's infrastructure. So we've got a few big infrastructure players coming. And when they perform, you'll begin to see a concentration of discussion on the business pages about the scale and potential of this industry.
So Tom, picking up what you conveyed, when you look ahead, what are your hopes and aspirations for the climate movement in the future? Why don't we start with that? What's your aspirations as far as where you think that's going to go?
Well, to be honest, my head at the moment is about understanding and grappling with the fact that we're failing on 1.5 and 2 degrees, that's gone. So we need to get our heads around the fact that 2.5, 3 degrees is coming. What that means to me is a couple things. We can talk about resilience and all that kind of stuff. That's where my head is at. But what it also means on mitigation is that we're going to begin to understand the increased importance of every ton that we mitigate, right? Because now, as we take it out of the atmosphere and as we reduce emissions, really what we're doing, instead of aiming for a temperature target, like I just think that's kind of a weird thing to aim for, is we are simply buying lottery tickets that reduce the probability of absolutely catastrophic climate change where the system kind of spins out of control. And so I think once we get our heads around that cognitive dissonance that we've failed in one way, so success means something different, I think we're going to dig deeper for every ton of carbon. I think the younger people understand that. I think conversations around family dinner tables have changed since Greta Thunberg kind of enabled young people to ask harder questions of their older generation. And that older generation is beginning to ask themselves, what am I going to say when my kids ask me, my grandkids ask me, what did you do when the world got hot? And that cultural shift that people are really beginning to look in the mirror and say, God, I better be on the right side of history on this thing. That's going to change everything. You can see it already. I think now we just need to take that cultural and psychological momentum, which is real. I think people are beginning to get scared, even in C-suites where they could ignore this and, smoke a cigar and be happy for one more factory opening and so on. I think people who are captains of industry are beginning to understand, like, oh, scheiße, like we're in a lot of trouble here because the kids have opened their eyes. That cultural shift is real. I think it permeates political classes. It permeates economic classes. And I think if we can open up pathways for solutions, I think we'll see capital flow and we'll see things begin to happen. So we're going to, the panic that I feel, I think other people are beginning to feel, but we can direct that panic into an all hands on deck World War II moment where we are mitigating carbon in order to avoid absolutely catastrophic outcomes for our global civilization. Those are the stakes in play. And I think we just need to harness that sort of fear into channeled activity, which can happen. You just got to give people the opportunity to play on the right side of history, and they'll play on the right side of history.
So are you conveying that effectively sooner or later it's going to be sort of an industrial revolution that everyone will have to do something?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like this is not, the clean tech's not a sector. Clean tech is a new way of producing and using energy, and every single energy consumer on the planet, which is everybody, will play. This is a massively horizontal play that permeates and gets into every niche and nook of the economy. And so everybody's going to be an actor in this thing. And culturally, you don't rewire the energy economy soup to nuts without everybody being on board. And that means there's a role for cultural ambassadors. My brother's an actor and a writer, Gord Rand, and they recently produced this funny series of videos called The Big Oil Alliance, which is a funny set take on caricature of our energy leaders, right? So, and so I think even cultural participants, actors, lawyers, accountants, plumbers, everybody's going to be involved in this soup to nuts rewiring our building. Like the employment opportunities just to retrofit our buildings is through the roof. So you want to make money, get into trades, be a climate hero, learn how to retrofit buildings. Everybody's a potential hero here. And including the cultural warriors, right, who need to get out in front of this thing and give the general public a way to engage on this issue that is maybe a little less threatening. I don't know. Who knows? But everybody's going to be involved in this, every sector, every person.
For a great episode, Tom. To end this off, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
The biggest takeaway is that this is a participatory game. So, everybody listening has a role to play. And I guess what I'm asking you to do is up your game. This is the moment, man. Up your game.
Thanks for that. Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
I share Tom's comment that this is a team game and everyone has to be involved. It's interesting, Tom. One of the parties that we work with is in Europe. They're in school right now, and they were saying every discipline in school, doesn't matter if you're in arts, business, engineering, everyone has to take a course on sustainability, on how it impacts what they do. And when I heard that, I thought, okay, that's the game changer. Everyone has to start thinking that way. So I think it will happen. I hope it happens quicker than it has or what it's been showing. I think as Canadians, and this is a message that I say often, I think if we don't, we're going to be really in bad shape as a country. Like we're just going to be in really. So I'm encouraging Canadians, North Americans to move quicker, because I think we'll lose some of the advantages that we've had in the past. In summary, that's what I got from what you're saying as well.
100%.
Dave and Tom, thanks for a great episode.
Happy to do it.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.